for as far as displaying their Christian displays at Christmas and so forth, and we don't want this in our society, and it's destroying our Islamic society. I don't know if if people would agree that
Would you agree with
well,
that? Would you be okay with that stuff? Like, let's say you, your society, people came here through illegal means and they were represented in office, and would you have an issue with that if you don't necessarily agree with them?
well, that's my point. It can't. A diverse society cannot hold. That's why nation states grew through the pressures of the population group and their environment in a natural state. So you had France for the French, you had Germany for the Germans, you had England for the English, and it worked out that way. Now we're seeing all the concomitant symptoms of diversity as we import different groups that are very disparate from each other. It's one thing to
Let's not blame groups for different economic failures or different social failures. There's many things that come along with that. We know, for example, that anti-Semitism, right, was literally a fabrication that started happening both in Europe and in the United States, right? Uh, who was this? What was his name? Lindbergh, right? Lindbergh was a big anti-Semite who forwarded different ideas of Jewish cabals running the country through media and academia, which were therefore published by Henry Ford in his book, The International Jew, who was then parroted by Hitler and Goebbels in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Right? Let's not start blaming diversity for issues. There's many other
why we
factors for
certainly
let's
well
let
I
there's many other
Dandan,
factors.
okay, I'd refer you to Robert Putnam's work. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not familiar with Robert Putnam. I'm not really sure who that is, but what I am familiar with is with the basic notion that diversity, in most respects, shows to strengthen nations. Right. This is true with Hellenistic culture during Greece. This was true with Roman culture. This was true with the unification and trade existing between Britain and France. Right. These were considered very different cultures. It's true with America at the turn of the century with immigrations from Europe coming in. It strengthened the nation. So when we look at history, immigration seems to be a very powerful force, not a destructive
Okay,
one.
okay. So Robert Putnam is a preeminent sociologist. At least he's a very good one from Harvard University. Now he's far to the left, and he went about the largest research in diversity ever performed in the United States. He did this in around 2000, the late 1990s. And he wanted it borne out that diversity was our strength. So this was the largest research in that respect ever. Well, to his consternation, he found, and you can read it in his book, Bowling Alone, wherever there was diversity, there was less participation in the civil process, there was economic downturn, there was more criminality. And what did people do more? They stayed inside and watched more TV. So this idea that diversity is our strength, and you mentioned the turn of the century with the diversity of Italians, Irish, Scots, Germans. Well, they're diverse in a sense with their particular cultures, but they were mostly and white
Well,
people
no, they were
from
not
Europe.
considered white. This is a modern myth that they were considered white.
They were
There were
considered white. It's a myth that they weren't.
there were legal battles where people of Irish and Italian descent were trying to be recognized as white by the legal systems, so they wouldn't be
That's silly.
challenged under immigration. This is
Yeah.
an historical fact.
Okay, so let me make a point here to point out the diversity of an Irishman and a Scot and an Englishman compared to an Englishman and someone from Haiti or someone from North Africa. Those aren't the same. Those are very disparate cultures, very disparate people. So you can have people from Europe who are white and have cultures that are similar,
But do you
but
see that you're exactly buying into the fascist myths of blaming the ethnic groups for the failures of a nation?
no, I'm observing what's empirical. I'm making observations.
So why is it that currently your assessment using constructed racial boundaries is more correct than the constructed racial boundaries that the Germans made with the Romani gypsies and the Jews, and the early Americans in the late 1800s and early 1900s made with Irishmen and Italians?
Well,
Why?
I think yeah, I think people have a habit of extrapolating some extreme things that happened in the past with the diversity of today and all of the problems that come with the different factions vying for their interests. So people will extrapolate what happened with the Holocaust and the Jews in World War II Germany, which of course should be condemned to the diversity that we have now and the problems we have with it. I don't think that's a fair
Well,
assessment.
this is so. For example, what is one of the diversity issues that has been a trope throughout American history? For example, the concept of a welfare queen, of nations who are incompatible, so they suck off those who work really well. Do you resonate with that, or do you not resonate with that?
Well, now see, that's that's not a fair thing to do. You're taking one thing and you're extrapolating that to well, look, if you're going to say diversity is not
Do
our
you want to
strength,
answer
then
the question or not? Because I'm
I
just
am.
asking if you
It's
resonate
not
with that or not.
it's not a binary answer, and I'm trying to give you one in context. I'm trying to give you one in context. Rather than just refer to the welfare queen, I would say that in the past so many decades, uh, since we've had the Hart Sellers Act, with millions of people coming from third world countries in combination with a welfare state and welfare provided to them so that if they don't make it here in the United States, they don't go back to their own countries. They come here and they're able to subsist on welfare alone and use government entitlements. We didn't have that from 1925 up until 1965, and we had no net increase in immigration because of it. Now, because of this different paradigm, we're seeing the concomitant problems that come along with it.
So yes, you do resonate with it.
Now, Dandan, I gave you my answer. You're trying
Yeah,
to
but
box
I'm
me
trying to
into a
keep
yes
you
or no.
honest, right? You can say many. For example, if I say, "Do you think that blacks are less intelligent than white people?" and you give me this whole story about IQ testing, and you're just being a brinksman. Like brinksmanship is getting almost to a conclusion without making the claim that you're believing in it,
Hmm.
and that's
Yeah,
what I
but
feel
I'm
that you've been
rejecting the
doing.
premise of your. I'm rejecting the premise of your question. That's the fallacy of providing. That's the fallacy of dichotomy.
I understand why you're challenging it, and I'm going to respond. I think. Here, I'll just do it. So what you're doing is that when you look, for example, at household incomes in the United States, Indian Americans actually outperform white Americans at a very large degree, as well as Nigerian immigrants do at a very large degree outperform American citizens and American born when it comes to average household incomes, which kind of stands in the way of this idea of they're munching off the welfare system. We also know the biggest states who take in welfare, federal welfare, are majority white states. I believe Kentucky is one of the highest states in the nation that takes in that welfare. So that empirical fact stands against this notion. And so the question becomes, where did these ideas of nativist, xenophobic, nationalistic tendencies come from?
So it gets to the point of does a country have a right to self determination? Japan does. We certainly do. Every country has a right to self determination, and through which they use their immigration laws. But in 1960, the problem with that is that in 1965, no major opinion poll did people respond more than 13% in wanting more immigration, especially from the third world. But it was foisted on us as a policy by the Democrats who had both sides of the aisle and had the executive office. They implemented the Hart Sellers Act, which changed the texture of our society forever. And we have seen a sea change in
Well,
our
was that
culture.
was that was that done through our democratic government?
That was done through a representative government who did not listen to the
That's what
interests
I
of
said.
their constituents.
So
Yeah, that so
it was done through a democratic process with the ability of the people to self-determine, unless you think that the American system is one which does not allow people self-determine.
in that instance, the government was corrupt.
So do you think so the government today isn't corrupt?
No, I'm saying in that instance, the government was corrupt because
So
at
we
no
keep
point.
moving. Mike. You're jumping from point to point. Let's just go back to one of the original points that fascism, specifically, which is a authoritarian right wing movement, is one that's based off this idea of attacking minorities for blaming its economic and social problems. And we have moved through a few claims that you went through. One of them saying that, oh, it's because they munch off the system. There's an empirical reality. That's wrong. Indian Americans make an average of 100,000, Filipino Americans, then Taiwanese, Sri Lankan, followed by Japanese, Malaysians, Chinese, Pakistani, and only under that is white Americans. We moved off that claim. And then we start going, do people not have the right to self-determine? Of course people have a right to self-determine. And in a country that has democracy like America, that people do vote and their vote isn't disenfranchised, especially during the 1960s. Most people who vote was disenfranchised was minority communities. The country self-determined to allow more minorities in. They did do the fact that does exist.
You're not if you have diverse groups, you're not going to be able to satisfy them all, and it's going to appear fascistic when their interests aren't satisfied. So
What do you mean appear
sometimes,
fascistic? We talked about what fascism is, right? How it
yeah,
appears.
yes,
And
I know, and
so
you're applying it.
so
You're
why
applying it in ways that don't that should not apply.
I have not made any contemporary statements. I've simply made historical statements. And if you have
No, yes,
taken
you
these
did.
historical statements,
You mentioned Donald Trump at the beginning.
I mentioned Donald Trump and using the term America first. I didn't say that there's currently a fascist government in the United States. Do you not agree that there are, of course, fascist movements in the United States? Different socio-political groups, of course, they exist.
I guess you could say there's fascist movements everywhere, but in a general sense, I don't think Donald Trump is fascistic.
I didn't say he was. You simply assumed that
Why did you mention him in the first place?
because he recoined the term America first, which
And
was
so you
used by
think that's
fascist movement in the 90s.
okay? Well,
I
there
didn't
you
say.
go.
Yeah, that doesn't. I didn't say that America's government is fascistic, or that Donald Trump had a fascistic government. What I definitely
You were
say that
implying that he used fascistic rhetoric.
America is definitely experiencing a resurgent in fascistic rhetoric. This is true. For example,
Yeah, but
let's start now.
yeah, you're trying to.
If you want me to talk about, like for example, fighting a peaceful transfer of power, that's a fascistic tendency. Did that not happen under Trump?
No, that did not happen.
Trump did
No,
not
but
fight
we'll get
the
off
peaceful
topic if
transfer of
we.
power.
Yeah, we'll get off topic if
No,
we
now
go
we're
there.
not.
There was
Now
a
we're
reason.
actually, Mike. Now we're actually staying on topic. If our topic is
No,
fascism,
we're not.
and
You're trying to
a
use.
tenant of fascism, and the tenant of fascism is a denial of a peaceful transfer of power, are we not
Yeah.
staying on topic currently?
No, you're setting down a premise that doesn't exist. That's the problem, and you're going to do this all night. I can see it.
Well, you can hang
Well,
up if you don't want to have continue the conversation.
well, I will ultimately if we can't have one. Well,
I mean, we
okay. So
are.
my point is this: that nowhere in history has diversity worked. We could see with the Roman Empire, it was part of the reason why it disintegrated. We can see in Brazil that you have a minority majority government. And you have the factions below them that are fighting for power. And you can see in the United States that we are more polarized because of our disparate cultures and beliefs than we have been since the Civil War.
Can I
So
say
there's
one thing?
nowhere
So
where
Can I
you
when
say
can.
one thing real quick? I just want to ask him: if you divide against others, you don't think that people would just divide amongst themselves because of the mindset and how people think? Because I mean, like, you could always diversity be a based off of perspective, and where even they're not 100% alike, right? And you could always be divisive within that group. No,
But
so
there's
that
a
type of thinking
spectrum.
is regressive. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
but
It
there's
doesn't.
a
It's
spectrum.
unsustainable. Once let's say these other human beings that people have a problem with, they didn't exist on this planet. You don't think that the people that have that divisive mindset would still be dividing along eye color or hair color or some other bullshit?
But Nivek, there's a spectrum of
Check.
divisiveness, and we don't need to make it worse by importing very disparate
Yeah,
groups.
we can hear
You
you,
need a
Dandan.
cultural
Yeah,
primacy.
that's my point.
Okay,
People
good.
talk like that who are the same amongst each other in the past.
But I want to address the specific claim of diversity has never worked. The American government started with divided we stand, divided we fall, united we stand. It is because the
States.
different states in the United States were very diverse, both religiously
Did you know?
and ethnically. Where you got
That's the problem.
but this was so amazing
Stargazing is
success
a great
throughout the
way.
But
1800s and
Dandan,
this
you
and the
can't
once let me
equate
you gotta
that.
let me finish speaking throughout the
Yeah.
history of the United States.
Still wearing
Right?
enough layers.
It has been the case that diversity, specifically ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity, is one that only exists in the mind of people, not in the reality that exists independent of our minds.
So when you're talking about the differences and diversity that we had between religious groups, whether it was the Lutherans or the Quakers or the Catholics, they were all Christian. They were all white Christians. And of course they had their differences, and you could say they were diverse in that respect. But then when you take a Muslim and compare that diversity, the differences between Islamic culture and Islamic ideology to white Christian ideology, that's a whole nother ball game. So you're extrapolating things.
You are simply creating you're saying that these things at the time, yeah, they were murdering and killing each other for these differences, right? They had revolutions and civil wars based on in Europe and conflict in the United States based on these different, but and they would not let their children marry these other people, right? They would just be like, oh no, these people are terrible, you cannot associate with them. Let's move up a little bigger, right? Muslims, Jews, and Christians, they're all Abrahamic. We have to worry about all the Taoists and Taoists. You can't mix in with those people. They don't even believe in
must
an
be living
Abrahamic
in-
God. You
we
are
must be
simply
living-
choosing, you are simply cherry picking.
That's what you're doing. We must be living in different realities, because the difference between someone from the Middle East or North Africa with an Islamic culture and ideology and someone from West Europe with a Christian white identity is completely different than the
Why
differences
have
between a
Christians,
Scot and an Irish.
Mike, why have Christians literally murdered each other in cold blood to the point where some of the brightest minds like Descartes and Hobbes tried to solve these religious civil wars in Europe and have come up with political systems so people with different religious ideas can live with one another.
So
did
you're
that because
ignoring the
these things-
huge differences. So that's what you're being as a sophist right now.
No, I'm
that's
not.
to
You
ignore-
are you are saying that these differences cannot be reconciled. Saying these differences are
No,
one that
I'm
need to
saying
be.
we don't need to create these differences by importing an entirely different, disparate culture. We don't need to do that, and that's what was done.
Mike, are you there? Am I the only one who can't hear him?
No,
No,
he
I
seemed
can't hear
to
him
drop.
Okay, I'll give it a few minutes.
And Dandan,
a couple of seconds.
Oh, okay, cool. And I just want to make sure you're refreshed. You do have 3 callers.
Yeah, I see,
Okay,
I see.
cool. Awesome.
Well, Mike seems to have dropped
I
out of
wanted
the
to ask
call.
him a
So
question too, if he's still there.
next time, so Mike, you can always jump back on the queue. I'll bring someone else in. Hello, Michael. You're on the call. You're live.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Michael. What's going on? I just want to make sure that remember the topic of today is fascism, and specifically both historical and contemporary American fascism.
All right. Well, thank you. Mostly I wanted to kind of make a couple points regarding what Mike was just saying, but I guess I don't know if I still can. But one was what you had mentioned about the list of minorities and income being higher than whites, which for those minorities is true. However, if you were to say look at like UK, you would find almost the opposite. So in the United States, typically when someone immigrates from, say, Asia or India, it's a harder immigration process, and so typically the people that are coming are, for whatever reason, I imagine, typically better off educationally, financially. While if you were to look at the UK, um, the Indian population that immigrates there, they would be worse off than average. So I do think just that's a point that you were kind of making. I disagree with Mike very much about the attitude he was taking regarding diversity. I think there are pros and cons. He kept mentioning Christianity, it seems to me like if we weren't having as many Hispanics immigrating to the country, we would be a much less Christian country to begin with, which I believe the Hispanic is more religious than the white community is now, which may not be popular in this community. But those were my diversity comments. I don't know if he would have any comments to say on that. Regarding fascism, if you want, I would pose a question that I
So real
regarding.
quick, I want to just I kind
Go
of did a
ahead.
little Google while you brought up the British statistics. Black Caribbean households make statistically the most money, median household in England. So
So yeah, the first time I saw it, it was very interesting because in a lot of ways it was almost the inverse of the United States. And I guess when you look at geographical locations, maybe that makes sense. I'm not really an expert on it, but that would be my theory.
yeah, but so let's bring it to fascism.
So I understand fascism is far right, and I would say personally in my life, I feel like over the past few years, it's like personally, a lot of the COVID implementations feel somewhat fascist. Like when you have a majority of a city that does not, and
Oh, are we losing Michael as well? Is
use,
everyone being lost today? Oh, there you are. Just restate what you were saying. We lost you at a big majority of city, and then that's it.
I'm just trying. Sorry. So like in California, where I live, they were mandating masks and above in preschool, and that was something that really bothered me, given the lack of evidence supporting it for 2-year-olds, given the fact that every person I know does not support masking 2-year-olds. So in a way, I get that fascism is far right, but I'm seeing it implemented in the public health square. While there may be a legitimate public health debate, it seems like that debate is largely not happening based on the science, and it's instead being based on the politics. And in this case, it's more left-leaning people that are taking that approach. Granted,
So I will just caution against confusing authoritarianism or even perceived authoritarianism with fascism. Right? You're right. The government not representing the will of the people is a definite part of fascism, but it might be sufficient, but it alone isn't fascism. Fascism is categorized by much more of a social cult of personality return to tradition element when we identify it. Um, this idea of an attack on the press, nostalgic the good old days type of ideology that one will find in fascism.
And
Dandan.
I don't
That
know if
statistic that you said that's an interesting statistic with the Caribbean. Is that really true?
Yeah, I can post it in the chat. Yeah.
That is
Black
interesting because
Caribbeans make on average, I think it's, what is it? Let me get the number specifically. They make median average is 300,000, as the median for white British is 200 and something. Yeah.
I mean, like, because they were enslaved under Britain, and
I don't know what to say. That's just what the data
and
says.
and 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 it, so it completely goes against this point. I mean, if that was the case, because they're the same as African Americans, they're the same people,
Yeah.
and they're telling me they're doing better on average.
that's in the UK. Not,
Yeah.
or hold on. Are you saying UK or USA?
So I'm saying the same
UK.
blacks in the Caribbean are the ones that are in America who do
Genetically, yeah.
who do worse in this country, and these folks who were the same blacks that were under British enslavement in the past, they do better in Britain on average. That's like
You may have.
that's completely that. I mean, like, if your point was right, that means they should be doing just as bad there as African Americans are doing here, but they're not. And
They
why
likely were
they're the
taken
same
there with
people.
different circumstances. So in the U.S.,
Yeah.
they were likely taken here against their will, and they may have chosen to go to the UK through a rigorous immigration process. I have no idea. I'm just speculating.
No, we know that slavery did exist in the UK, and the anti-black sentiment was a strong thing. Just they're different countries, and I don't think Britain went through the same rigorous Jim Crow attacks. And as W.E.B. Du Bois actually said, I said it earlier, maybe you weren't in the chat, but his quote was in his book Black Reconstruction. He goes, "The evidence of fascism in America is Jim Crow." So
Yeah.
I just, yeah.
I would just say there's no doubt that there have been terrible movements in the United States and terrible atrocities committed. Um, but I don't know. I don't believe that makes the U.S. as it is now fascist.
Oh, I would agree. The United
But
States currently is not a fascist state. Absolutely not. I think that's not even for dispute. But the point is, did it have fascism, and did it have strong elements of fascism in the past? Absolutely. And the question is, can it be fascist again? Remains absolutely. And is there a
and
rise
how do
in?
you
Hmm?
how do you envision that fascism most likely arising?
Well, fascism needs a few legal changes to change, right? So, for example, making voting more difficult for groups that we don't want to vote, a specific denial of a democratic process and the peaceful transfer of power, cult of tradition, demagoguery. A big one is important, the strong man, where only this person will be able to lead us out of the corruption of the media and the elites. That's also a really big point of fascism. We also see that fascism tends to sociologically um, uh, arise with different separatist flags. So in Nazi Germany it was the swastika. In Italy, I forget exactly which flags they had. But we also see very similar things in the United States currently with the reemergence of Confederate flags, Don't Tread on Me flags, Thin Blue Line flags, black flags, all these different things, where instead of flying
Well,
your own
I,
country's flag, you're flying a different flag in your protest, in
now
your love for the nation.
now, and I don't want to necessarily enter into like whataboutism, but in California, um, a lot of people. I mean, the Black Lives Matter flag was
Yeah.
or slogan was everywhere. It was put up in businesses a lot of the time against the will of people that worked in the businesses. not necessarily saying that they don't support Black Lives, but saying that they didn't support the movement, which was calling for protests to defund the police, which was in and of itself an unpopular position. But that was forced upon all sorts of businesses all throughout Hollywood and Los Angeles, and I assume up in the Bay Area.
No, I would
Um,
agree with you. I would
it,
agree
it,
with you that this is definitely a similar symptom, but we have to be
so I was
careful
just
because
rebutting because every example you
yeah,
gave was kind of right leaning.
no. It. But this is the no. I mean, fascism is right leaning. It can only
Oh,
you can have
I mean
other
Republican
terrible things
leaning.
on the. No, that's not about Republican or not. It's just about it's a right wing ideology because it's there to keep around hierarchies and establish them. It's not about Republican or not. That's not the point. Parties and the names of
So
parties
would
are
you?
no. What I'm
So
trying to
would
get to
you
is
say
that
that?
yeah,
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
No,
Well, I was
so
just
just
gonna
keep
ask,
yeah,
like,
keep it
let's say
go with
Black
that.
Lives Matter, or forget Black Lives Matter and switch more to, say, ironically, either Antifa or that shop area that was in Seattle. Would you say that there was fascism in those dynamics, or no, because there wasn't a specific individual that was commonly known at the head of it?
That plus there was no cult of tradition, the fetishization of masculinity, the abolishment of like um, the binaryism of like strong manhood, demagoguery, refusal. Like that's not what was happening. Now you are right that
So,
separatist flags are definitely an issue. Also with authoritarian left wing movements like Pinochet and Stalin, those are problematic. I'm not a fan of them. But when we focus on the specific phenomena of fascism, it needs not each symptom. Like, let's say we're doctors and we're looking at a patient and we go, oh, he has a headache. We don't just go ahead and rule together brain cancer with a cold, right? We rule in together. We rule in together. We have to look at all the other symptoms to diagnose him with the disease. If that disease is fascism, we need many different symptoms. And those symptoms being separatist flags, delegitimization of political power, refusal of peaceful transfer of power, attack on free press, nativism, xenophobia, nationalism, strongman, call of the leader, nostalgia of the past, cult of tradition. You need all of these together to have fascism.
and a lot of those are, I mean, it would be relatively easy to draw a parallel between some of the modern right in terms of their personality around Trump, and
Yeah,
obviously with the election contesting, and so that's kind of low hanging fruit, but attacks on the media. But there are attacks on the media also coming from the left.
you're right.
There are, you mentioned um, the xenophobia or something like that. I would
Yeah.
argue that when it comes to Cuba, there the immigration policy on the left is not necessarily as wide open as you may claim it to be,
What do you mean
because
by that with
it
Cuba?
seems like places that do not vote as democratically or as left leaning are less prone to have additional things. So I believe it was sometime in the past year that the White House did not want to increase immigration from Cuba when Cuba was going through a lot of their protests. They didn't want to make any outward measures there, but they will allow more immigration from, say, Mexico. So one which is a right-leaning place, which in Florida has now voted Republican, and then Mexico, which predominantly, historically, people immigrating from there have voted democratically, though I don't know if that trend is likely to continue
Can I respond to
this
the
year.
Cuba thing real quick? With Cuba, there's
Yes.
the wet foot, dry foot policy. They could just come in. That's all they had to do was just come to the country, and it was about trying to open relations with Cuba, in what the left was trying to do. The canceling of that was to just open up normal relations with Cuba. So it wasn't about isolating Cuba and being, anti-Cuba in any way. And where, it was trying to go towards that trend of normalizing relations between the U.S. and Cuba, and with Obama, and the aim of that would be about having America influence Cuba in changing its ways by doing that. And so
Uh,
yeah, it wasn't
and
really
that
about
seems
harming.
fair. I would just say the majority of immigrants admitted to the United States tend to vote more left leaning, as opposed to, say, the Asian population, which is not as left leaning, but there's a lot less Asians immigrating to the United States than, say, Hispanics. Either way, I'm not, like, I don't care, and I think that 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 if there was an intent to reduce right leaning immigration into the country, I think that it's going to have failed, given the modern political direction, and in particular with religion, which once again I know isn't very popular in this community, but I
America
think that the left
itself
has.
forming was leftist, right? Because it's revolting away from monarchism.
Yeah,
The term monarchism
I
was
think
those
I
who
think
are
if we're
on the
going
right.
to focus on left and right, we are going to not be able to understand how to identify what fascism is and what it looks like. The point here isn't to create any partisan divide. It's simply to identify history, to analyze it, and try to apply that analysis to certain things happening today. If anyone has heard my past shows, I am not a fan of American Democrats. Not one bit, not one tinsy bit. I hate them. I don't like them. I'm also not a fan of American right wing. Not a fan at all. Hate them. Think they're terrible. But we have to be able to recognize that the right currently, and what has happened in the last year and the years beforehand, has started to rear up some fascist tendencies. That is something that is dangerous. That is something that we need to put an eye on. That's something that we should not take lightly. In the same way that if the left started embracing groups like Antifa and started calling for, using specific language found in Maoist China and Stalinist Russia, we should also be very worried. Um,
Now, how would you, and a lot of those definitions, in particular, the way a lot of people on the right relate to Trump, is very concerning in terms of the personality, and that only he can fix it. I'm curious how you compare to they view Reagan, in at least in retrospect, or at the time.
well, we definitely know that.
Were the same
Yeah.
risks there at
So
that time?
in a way, not as explicit as it is today, but in many ways, we also know that during Reagan's time, we know that the white power movement changed its collar shirts for camo fatigues. That was also like a big thing that happened during the 80s. Um, Maybe a little bit, but not as much. So it definitely did happen a little bit, just not in the same scale and openness as it's currently happening.
And how I'm just trying to see how you could have, like, the modern Republican or the right in the United States um, have the will to come out and vote, but not have a strong opinion for their elected official, or their nominee, in a sense.
Well, you should have a strong opinion for your nominee. There's a difference between having a strong opinion, having a fetishization of the man, right? For example, flying Obama flags, flying Hillary flags, flying Clinton flags, flying Bush flags, that's all good. But at a certain point, when you're flying the man's face on the American flag, and you chant the names, um, instead of chanting the country, we begin to see something different. That becomes the fetishization, the cult leader aspect of it, right? That's like the line where it becomes this type of obsession, one which has some a mysticism around him, and that's where QAnon was. QAnon was a social mysticism around the man, who he is the one who's fighting the deep state, that without him, he will release us from salvation.
Now, I would say, both Trump and Biden have had challenges with their approval ratings, and they both dropped to the low 40%. But what percentage of, say, the right would you say feels that way about Trump? And then is
Well,
it
let me
a
quickly.
substantial
What
number,
was
or is it
it?
just
Let me quickly pull it up. How I wish I had a Jamie, like what's his name does. How many QAnon supporters are in the Republican Party? Mm-mm-mm. Where is it? I mean, I think I saw something about 20% of Republicans believe some QAnon conspiracy, from what I remember, but I don't want to quote something that I can't find evidence for. Um, this is the number that I remember, but if someone's looking it up, because I want to keep the conversation flowing, I mean, there's even some QAnon supporters in Congress, right? Like from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Matt Gaetz, Madison Cawthorn. That's definitely a reality as well that's existing currently,
mhm.
right? Marjorie Taylor Greene
so
has
so
openly said that Jews are burning California with space lasers. So
yeah, I mean, there's no doubts lunatics on the right, and I would say that there are some on the left. I don't.
100%, I
My
agree with that.
guess is there's a little bit more on the right than on the left, but I think that there might just be that naturally when you take large groups of people, that some of them are going to be borderline crazy.
But the scary part is whether they sit in representative office.
I agree. I don't personally know all that much
Oh,
about
here it
Matt
is. Here it
Gaetz. I've
is.
heard a lot about
It
Marjorie.
says, here's a story. Blah, blah, blah. A PRPPI report released last Thursday that was based on data from separate polls conducted that 16%, or 44 million people within the Republican Party, believe in the core tenet of QAnon.
And what
I
is
don't.
that core tenant?
Let's see. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, they just asked them, "Do you believe with the central beliefs of QAnon?" And 16% said yes. Let me get the exact report. Oh, the government, media, and financial worthies are controlled by a group of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who run a global sex trafficking operation. There's a storm coming that would soon sweep away all the elites in power and restore the rightful leaders. Because things have gone so off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. These were the questions that they asked. And they have found, that
And you're
about
saying 16% agreed with that? Or
that's what it
16%
says.
of Republicans?
That's what it says.
Yeah, I mean, uh, it's
I,
pretty crazy stuff.
I'll post the link to the research right here. This is what the last I remember
Yeah,
saying that.
you know, I over time I have shifted from being far left to center. Now I would say I'm leaning slightly right, but I am very disturbed by the cult around Donald Trump, and I am disturbed by January 6th.
I would agree.
And so, um,
If there's one
I
thing
I
that I
don't.
think as someone who I wasn't born in the United States, I moved from Israel. One thing that I have quickly noticed in a country that has many different political parties is this left-right dichotomy in the United States kind of keeps you in this really bad headspace. And the answer is I would prefer not. I would prefer not to be right, prefer not to be left. There needs to be, or Democrat, Republican, there needs to be a position that recognizes the evils of both and aims for something higher, aims for something better. And these solutions are not going to be ones that come from the bodies that have, in reality, which is true, which is everyone understands, the failures of the American society. There is a failure in America, and anyone who lives in the United States can feel that failure, both globally and domestically. And this is the fault of these two parties and the structures and relationship that they have.
And I think I agree. I would make another point though, regarding. So I mean, I think we would likely agree that there are significantly more fascist players in the world, and I'm thinking specifically right now of Russia and with Putin. And
Hmm.
would you characterize him in that manner?
Oh, of course. I mean, he really
Oh,
tries to do it,
so
but he fails on the social aspect. There's a lot of
eh,
Russians
eh,
don't like him as much, but he does fail on the social
so
aspect,
I
but he definitely attempts to be.
so I do see a little irony in the, or I don't know what the right word is, but as America gets weaker, I do feel the threat of regional or global fascists or authoritarianism um, increases globally to the point where if the United States didn't necessarily display the weakness it's displayed over the past year in particular, possibly beyond that, that these disasters on the global scale um, would be less likely. And so I do see a little bit of a almost contradiction that that as we become weaker, the world becomes more dangerous. But then the people on the right, let's say, I don't, that's not the right thing, but the pro-military people, which are likely more fascistic, also help stabilize some of the global influence because there are real fascists out
Yeah.
there and
So
authoritarians.
I would say that it's important not to conflate the association of things with the causation of things. So even during the 1915 and post World War One and before World War Two, fascism was gaining traction all over the world, in the United States, in Europe, Japan, and the like. Um, and this wasn't necessarily due to American weakening. Um, there are many factors at play. So, right. So at the
What
same time,
time
well,
period were you?
1915, 1920s, right? For example, like I
And
think,
I'm thinking much more post World War II, but
yeah, but even during that time, like for example, who was it? Langston Hughes at the time said, "Give Franco hoods, and he will be the Klan." Right? Or you see different silver shirts were really copies of brown shirts in the United States. The black shirts, who were part of the American First Committee, the black helmets were also a part of that. The Order 76, which were also a fascistic group in the United States, was around that time. You even see that the KKK, the second party, the second coming of the KKK, was launched with the lynching of Leo Frank in 1915. And they were openly American fascists, even called with them Fascista America. They called themselves that. So
well,
it's an
thank
interesting
you
global
very much.
phenomena.
I I think it's been very interesting talking to you, and on this topic, I would say that I am not terribly knowledgeable. So I will disconnect and let you carry on. But before I go, I would just ask: is there any particular book or anything that you would recommend that perhaps
Yeah, so a good
I
book would be
get
How
to?
Fascism Works: The Politics of Us and Them by Professor Jason Stanley. He's a professor of philosophy at Yale University. And drop by the Discord. I'll definitely put some links in the politics tab after this discussion. So,
Dandan, can I ask him a
All
quick
right.
question?
yeah, of course, Never. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering. You said that people got emboldened, authoritarianism, fascism of other countries. I was wondering if you're thinking that a display of right wing. You think that the right it more shows strength that would have prevented those things from happening.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Um,
I don't know
No,
enough to
his
understand.
no. I'm asking. What's his name?
Oh, you're asking Michael. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
me-
Yeah, because you said
well,
because you talked about it looked like authoritarianism and fascism they got emboldened, and I was wondering where you think where you're trying to say that
it,
emboldenment came from. Did it come from the left or did it come from the right of
here,
America?
I'll say,
You're hello.
obviously, hi, can you hear me?
You're breaking a minute. Yeah, I hear
Can
you
you,
now.
okay. I would say primarily from the left, but I mean, obviously, Trump
Okay.
has said some things that were weakening in rhetoric towards NATO and the importance of NATO. So that's one component. But I would say,
You don't
just
think
my
fanning the
personal
flames
opinion.
of division on the right would, in breaking up society, would it contributed to that emboldenment?
Well, let me say three things on there. But one, yes, fanning the flames of division weakens the country. And that is something that you could say the right is doing, and that is also something that you could say the left is doing.
Okay,
But no
but I was
doubt
just saying a
that,
more unified country that is leans away from authoritarianism, is more democratic, is what Putin didn't like because that was a threat. That is that I
mhm.
don't see that as emboldenment. I saw that as a fear.
But
The emboldenment
let,
came from seeing the divisions within the country and trying to show
let
that
me just,
democracy doesn't work.
I do think that that's a fair point from a higher level, but on the specifics, the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. We had 2,500 people or troops there. Previously, we had around 10,000 or so troops there, and we were experiencing casualties. Maybe 5, 10 a year. It's tragic, but that happens in these conflicts. But anyways, against the will of generals, we withdrew from Afghanistan on a timeline. We left American citizens outside in that area. We refused to use our military to leave the airport to get them because we were afraid of like a Black Hawk Down scenario. So it demonstrated a truly unprecedented level of American weakness in my lifetime. Then, leading up to the Ukraine invasion, I believe it was January, I read the article that Biden said that there that the U.S. military would not evacuate any American troops in Ukraine because that would start World War III. So my point is just generally the absolute knowledge that we would not use our military to defend American people helped encourage Putin to decide that he
That,
could
that
go into
that could definitely
Ukraine
be true. But before we
and
come, I want to keep the conversation on point. Michael, I love you, man. You're awesome
Mhm.
to talk to. Get on the Discord. I don't know if I've seen you there before. Get on the Discord. We have these conversations
I
every day.
haven't, but thank you very much. But
No,
I
definitely
got this
do.
app and I'm
Yeah, of
All
course,
right, thank
definitely
you so
do.
much,
It'd be
and
cool. No
I'll
problem.
check out that book that you recommended.
Yeah, and again, jump on the Discord. I'll post a lot more references in the politics tab. I encourage everyone, if you like these conversations, jump on the Penguin Discord. We have conversations like this every night. I might not be there every night, but on the weekends, I'll definitely be around. So thank you, Michael, again. Let's get to Christian.
Thank you, thank you.
Hello, Christian. You've been waiting a long time. Patience of a true saint. How are you doing?
Hello.
Hello, Christian.
Everything is right here. Yes, it was a long
Hello?
time. Hello.
Hello, yes.
Hello. Yes. I was saying that it was a long time, but no problem.
Oh, your mic is really chopping up. Try to fix it up a bit. I'll give you a couple of seconds to see if it's gonna work, and then we'll see what's going on.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. Now you're crystal clear.
Okay. I was saying that it was a long time, but there's no problem with that.
What are your comments, concerns, ideas, places you think I'm an idiot, places you think I'm not an idiot? What's going on?
No, I will not use that term. um, I'm. I think that most the biggest problem that I think maybe is that um, I think that fascism is born out of a collapse in in a meta narrative that a nation tells itself, and then a charismatic leader to reveal the identity of that nation has a true propaganda, charm, and violence reinstates
100%.
the nation. Reinstates the nation, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same nation. It's a
Agreed.
mutation, you could say, of that
Mm-hmm.
vision, of that original vision of the nation. That's why I was saying that it's you could see it as a corrupt monarchical system, because in a monarchical system there's culture and tradition that needs to be respected, or the monarch could get killed by his people, or by someone in the succession to the throne as some kind of heretic, and could be eliminated. The in monarchies are not, well, absolute monarchies are another beast, but monarchies, more stable monarchies, uh, people, the monarch has to serve the people. Fascism, the people only serve and worship in some way that the leader, as the one that's bringing back the glory of the nation.
I mean, I would 100% agree with that, and that is a good observation. I liked what you said, because with my now, I am not a total expert on this. I just want to let everyone know that my conversations on here can be two parts. I will let everyone know if this is something that I've studied at length, but most of the time it's things that I currently things that I'm currently interested that I want to share with people. And one of the things you said is something that I've heard parroted by a historian. I believe her name is Sarah Churchwell, and she said, I think she works for a university in England, in Britain, and she's a professor of American history and American studies. And the thing that she said was that they have an idealized version of history, a mythical version of the nation's history that they want to uphold, very much different than how the nation is or even was. So that's a really good perspective that I think you brought up, and I want to thank you for that.
No, thanks. I actually didn't know any of that. It's good to see that I'm not in in a, in a in a crazy place here, and there's
Yeah,
actually
this is
something
something that
backing me. So
because it's all about a cult of tradition, right? So, I can hear you have an accent. Where are you from?
I'm from Dominican Republic.
Dominican. My ex girlfriend was Dominican. So, a
It's said
question.
that that Dominican
Huh?
women are good. I don't know how it went for you.
What'd you say? They weren't very good. You say?
No, no, it said that Dominican women are very good. I don't know how it
Yeah,
went
she
for
she
you.
was. It was great, but we had some familial issues. It didn't work out, but all the love towards her. Um, but so like I don't know too much about Dominican culture, but I'm sure there's definitely like strands in Dominican society that have like, this like mythicness of Dominican history. Can you elucidate or maybe share with us what those might be?
Well, we actually had a fascistic dictator sponsored by the U.S. for like
Okay.
30 years. So, uh,
Okay. What was that like?
in that era of the banana republics, so
Mm-hmm.
he's known as Trujillo, and
I heard the name before.
he was called El Jefe. That's the
Mm,
equivalent to the Führer. So it's actually a pretty interesting thing because he actually did not like Nazism, and we hosted a colony of Jews in Second World War. So it's actually a pretty interesting way how it can be fascism can be pretty different from place to place, but
correct.
it holds the same structure in a lot of ways.
Yep, which is a
And
structuring of right delegitimization of the political process, refusal for peaceful transfer of power, attack on immigration, attack on with a loving of the nativist, a loving of the nation, fetishization of the strong man, cult of leader, cult of tradition.
yeah,
Yeah.
in actually we have a very inverse process here in some ways of the fascistic mindset, and it has its reasons because you can say that the person that actually modernized the country and threw it like 20 years to the future unified and institutionalized a lot of things and actually gave a pretty constructed an identity of the country was Trujillo. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, he was a fascistic dictator. And in some sense, we have right now a lot of corruption. We have a lot of institutional problems because he was assassinated, but in some sense, to perpetuate corruption, the
Mm-hmm.
the country was divided between elite families after his assassination. So, in some sense, it was not a puritanical uh, desire to take out the dictator. It was a malicious intent to take out the dictator, and
Mm.
the country has that big segment of people that want something like that again, and and he actually did massacre like 3,000 30,000 no like 3,000 Haitians at one time too. So there's there's a lot of
So,
uh,
what was that called? The what was it? I just looked it up. I think it was Parsley Massacre,
the
right?
yeah he it was used a shibboleth what was
Yeah,
used,
10,000
and
Haitians. They tried to escape after he brought them
yeah
in.
it is much more complicated than simply the Hitler way of this mythical history around the Haitians. There was a lot of problems and about regularization. Uh, he gave an, if I don't misremember, he gave uh, he advised he uh, I cannot get the word, but he told the Haitian president that he needed to recall everyone that was not regulated here in the country, or there will be consequences if I don't misremember the
Mm-hmm.
facts. Uh, the, that did not happen, and well, violence ensued, and both countries always have had a lot of problems, and the shibboleth was used because Haitians have never have been a population of Spanish speaking people, and they cannot pronounce parsley in Spanish. That in
Mm-hmm.
Spanish is perejil, and they cannot say it. So it was a
Perejil,
way
okay.
to like
The parsley.
we are we are black,
So,
so in Dominican
mm-hmm.
Republic too. So the you cannot divide us in ethnic lines. So it was the way to identify people because you cannot identify us by ethnic in an
Yeah.
ethnic way.
So an interesting thing that I'm reading right now is Trujillo, even though he was extremely he was considered fascistic light. He didn't encompass all the points of fascism, but you're definitely right that he was very fascistic light, very cult of personality, very strong man,
Yeah,
militaristic leader.
the cult of personality was pretty big, but there's definitely a way in that it was something that increased over time, not something that was from the beginning. It's it was something that was in some ways developed uh,
Mm-hmm.
because people around him and I think that's something that always plays a role in fascistic people. People around them see them as a locus of power for them, and
Obviously.
they inflate their egos, and that's then later is manifested in much more horrible and violent ways. I think that happened here, for example, is that Trujillo would rape women by the end of his dictatorship. He will see a woman that he likes. He will call for the woman to be brought to him, and he will be with the woman she wanted or not. But in some sense, there's reports that initially, or there were initially, or maybe at the same time, it's difficult to know. Different families in the country offered voluntarily their daughters to Trujillo in exchange of land and power. So, in some sense, is that vicious sexual desire was fed by the people that were giving their daughters to him voluntarily. So, when the when someone would not like to give their daughters, so it will it will not be voluntary, but that thing was created in him in some very strange way by the same people that were trying to use him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. Well, that was very insightful. Thank you so much, Christian, for that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
uh,
one thing that I think it is very important to underscore in about the American problem right now is that you actually have in America you actually have two meta narrative two visions of the countries clashing that are incompatible, and both visions are collapsing. Not only
yes,
one, both visions are collapsing because
correct.
the the left vision of the nation is every most sound thinking people know that that's wacky, it's not gonna work. But the right vision of the country is collapsing too because the
100%. And you see this
the
with the rise of the likes of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the
yeah.
Squad. And the same right, you see what happened with with the GOP, with the Republican Party. Seems to be this failure that the American population feels, and they're blaming. And right now, it's just about figuring that out. What I worry about, and the thing that scares me the most, is the radical nature that the right wing has been currently exhibiting, um,
Yeah,
and that's
and
the scary part
I
for me.
can, that's actually something that I will differ. I think that what's happening in the right is more uh, introverted. I don't know how what it's something that's happening under the surface, but the radicalization of the left is happening uh, open in the
Why do
in
you
the
say
public.
that? How do you reconcile that with the fact that the recent president of the United States was an accomplice, or a soft accomplice, in trying to stop the certification of an election, as compared to the left wing, who softly rejected Bernie during its primaries, but he still kind of took hold
That
of the party in many respects.
that's that's actually the thing. I think that something that's a big problem is that the radicalization of the right is happening, but this open-eyed radicalization that part is mostly media construed. And I know that I'm not going into comparisons here. I'm just saying I know the QAnon stuff and all the thing that's pretty crazy and stupid, but a lot of things that were built around Trump in a lot of ways were more manipulated than really happening. I don't think that I don't really don't think that it's that simple that everything that was reported about Trump it was actually happening because like I said most most it's mostly media construed because the media is mostly left leaning and that radicalization that's happening on the left is affecting the media too. It's not something that who is right. I'm not making that claim
Oh, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. I'm not making that
I,
claim either. I would agree with you.
because I think that if if we're talking about acting and going into violence territory and actually taking hold of power, the right will always win. It's actually what history has shown, and the right is what's going to win, and it's gonna to be and it's gonna be devastating if it happens, because the left is actually quite inefficient in violent scenarios and actually reestablishing order through power and violence.
Okay.
But
I want to ask a quick question. You, like in the past, in where America had a civil war, you think the conflicts of today in the modern age wouldn't wouldn't that be different? I mean, aren't we kind of having the same thing, but just a different version of the civil war in modern times? We're not going to be, it's not like we're going to be like how people view it of like shooting each other. I don't see that route. I just see it as becoming like it's more through discord in people in what do you call it, the battle of ideas, right? The war of ideas, culture wars.
yeah, but that's actually the thing that I'm trying to establish. The the culture wars is the meta narrative collapsing, and after the meta narrative collapse, you get to the physical violence when that process ends, because it's not and the scale is not like you're gonna have the scale. I don't think that it will ever go to civil war territory, but something is gonna end up happening eventually, because
I hear
It just
that.
there
happened, the
Nivik,
insurrection.
we're getting towards the end of the show, and I want to give James a chance to fully fledge out his ideas. So, Christian, I want to thank you. Definitely come back again. I'd love to hear your opinions, and
yeah,
let's get
thanks.
James in. Thank you so much, Christian. Hello, James. You've been waiting an extraordinarily long time. What is up with you? What are your thoughts, ideas, concerns? James?
Okay, I think I'm on now, right?
Oh, yes, I can hear you loud and
Sorry
clear.
about that.
No
Thank you.
problem.
I don't mind waiting. You guys are great to listen to. I just want to go back several colors back when you were talking about immigration. PBS put out an amazing piece called "The First Measured Century," and it kind of took you through a historical look at social science and how everything was collected and how decisions were made in regards to immigration and how certain groups were allowed in and certain groups were not allowed in. how neighborhoods were color coded in these beautiful maps, and it was right down to the location of where you came from in the world. And it just seemed like everything was just socially engineered. Like, Mediterranean Europeans weren't allowed until a certain parameter was met, and you had Northern Europeans that were here, and then they said, okay, let's let the Southern Europeans in at some point. So it just seems like it's heavily socially engineered, and I would also think that still goes on to today. So anyway, that's called the first measured century, and I thought it was brilliant. And then
I
my
would,
other question, again,
yeah, I was going to comment on that. I would agree with that, and I also agree that during that time we also saw a very big rise of fascism in America, which is a nice correlation between the two periods.
I do have now speeding up to today. What would you say? Um, there's a fascist. There's a fascist. I don't know ideology. Can it be an ideology? Does it have to have a face? Does it have to be one person? Does it
I
cross political parties?
I don't think it needs to have a necessarily a face, right? We know that the early fascistic movements in the United States didn't really have a specific face.
Right.
Um, and can they cross parties? I mean, they definitely did during the Weimar Republic in Germany.
Okay.
Currently, in the United States, and the way the parties are so dichotomous, because fascism is a right wing thing, it can't be left wing, but there's definitely left wing authoritarian elements that can be extremely harmful and dangerous.
Right.
But
And
I
that
just wouldn't call them fascism.
okay. And then preventing freedom of speech would definitely be one weapon and element of a fascist organization, right?
I don't know if it's necessarily preventing freedom of speech, more
Okay.
as a lot of times they'll use the guise of freedom of speech to bully and to demean and to say falsehoods.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of times you'll have this almost radical free speech where even falsehoods are expected as a common part of everyday discord as a way to sow propaganda, like yellow journalism, right?
Yeah.
Yellow journalism, we you and I would agree shouldn't be a thing, but in a radical free speech perspective, it should definitely be allowed, which helps the government in propaganda in the same way that Ford made his International Jew, and in the same way Goebbels made his Protocols of Zion. These were false documents put out in a yellow journalism fashion.
Right. And then we know of Operation, what is it called? Operation Mockingbird, that the intelligence organizations in our country have, a red phone, somebody in every news outlet, every corporate office to basically say yay or nay. And that is happening right now. So that's corporate media with a direct line to
Yep.
some organization that has overseen
We,
intelligence and what.
exactly. We know that currently, right? There's evidence out that Mark Meadows, the chief of staff for Donald Trump, was in connection,
Mhm.
was speaking with Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham at Fox News about
Right.
policy prescriptions and policy ideas. They
Right.
even spoke on the day of the insurrection, so we know that is definitely happening.
Right. Okay. So here's the question. There are 34 states in the United States that have
Hmm.
laws that don't allow any organization, any discussion, any organization of boycott, any organization of divestment. So there's the BDS movement. So if you're preventing any free speech to discuss a foreign country or maybe something you don't like that's going on that counters international law, would you say that the anti BDS movement and the fact that you now have legislation that prevents you from organizing or speaking out, is that a Christian right wing Judeo Christian form of fascism that prevents us from organizing and discussing what's going on in another
It
country?
will definitely be a specific point that could be fascistic.
Yeah.
Um, but I would again, and I think I've said it throughout the show a few times. Remember that when diagnosing fascism, we need many different symptoms to emerge. It's
Mhm.
definitely sufficient. I definitely think it might be sufficient. It really depends on how it is used in a social sense, right? Because fascism is much more of an ideology than a specific set of prescriptions or laws or policies when you combine them together.
Yeah. Okay.
But it
That's the
might
only
be.
thing
I'm
I
not.
can think of in terms of like a direct. Right now in our country, you're not allowed in certain countries to dialogue, organize, divest, boycott. Like, and to me, that just seems really strange in the year 2022. Now,
Oh yeah, I
softly, I
agree
know
with
things
that.
are happening. Yeah,
I mean, no, I agree.
softly,
I 100%.
yeah, it's an awkward moment, but
For
that's it.
for
I
me,
think,
for me, another one which would be very similar would be government's involvement in specific education. I think, for example,
yeah,
the White House's response to the 1619 project, the 1776 project, was a type of fetishization of the past and trying to put that in through a federalized mechanism, whether the 1619 project was an academic New York Times endeavor. The New York Times plus some academics put it together. I disagree with it. That's not the point. The point is when you see the government start to push these nationalistic, strongman, return to tradition type of ideas, that's when things become a little scary.
yeah. All right, I'm going to jump off. I appreciate everything that you all do, and I will be listening and look forward to the future.
Well, thank you, James, so much.
Thanks,
Definitely
guys.
hop in the Discord. You're a great interlocutor. I hope I have time to speak with you more often.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Well, that was so interesting. We have another 15 minutes. I know Trav is like, if you have the energy, go longer, but this is a work day, fellas. I did my hardest, but let's go. Next caller. Let's get Lance on the line. Hello, Lance. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. I kind of joined just a few minutes ago, but you were talking about yellow.